Hello, everyone. I am Corey Andrew Powell, and I am so thrilled today to be joined by Alita Guillen, an Emmy Award-winning journalist and top communications advisor here with us today. Now, from coaching high-profile clients to covering global events, Alita brings valuable insights on seizing opportunities and unlocking potential. That's the most important thing, unlocking your personal potential. So, Alita, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Corey.
Yes, well, it is my pleasure. And as I mentioned to you before we began recording, you and I have this love of communication and kind of talking about just the skill building aspects to communication. So I would like to ask you though, before we begin, what is it for you that sparked, I guess, the transition from from television to becoming a talent consultant? I guess there's a linear line there, but I would love to hear your story.
Yeah. So I was a television news anchor and reporter in several cities for many years. And then when I moved to LA, I didn't really want to go back to that traditional news. I was kind of looking for something else. And so I started doing some consulting, some traditional media training. And I realized that this was a real need. People
Hmm.
really needed to be able to communicate. And it was more than just the media training. What do I do when the camera's on type of a thing? And because I was in LA, I started to work with some high profile talent in the entertainment industry. And I realized that there was this idea of we're all communicating, we're all always communicating. And we sort of overlook that. We think that when we're communicating, it's just because we're giving a presentation or we're just on camera. But it was so much more than that when I started out. And I realized that these very high profile people who were already communicating could actually turn it up a notch.
Mm.
And so that became sort of my sweet spot in the business of communication and consulting and talent hosting and training with high profile people.
Mm.
I think we overlook a lot that we are constantly communicating, and communicating is connection. And so it doesn't matter what level you're doing it at, you're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to make a connection. And when we do that, we find success and happiness. So whether
Mhm.
it's at work, when you're communicating and you're doing this really well, or you are speaking to your family or your loved ones and you do that really well, you feel
Yeah.
happy. When that goes well, you're really happy. So communication is just more than that presentation and more than how we think about it traditionally. So my goal is really to make people think about how they communicate kind of at all times in
Mm.
all different scenarios, whether it's email or an opportunity like this.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up too, because and on one hand, you're talking about it in the professional context of people whose livelihood relies on them being a public figure. But
Right.
then again, I remember being in class and, a communications class,
Yeah.
and students would be like literally perspiring and about to pass out at the very thought of
Yeah, I
having to get in
know.
front of people, like the fear. Why do you think that fear is there?
Okay, well, Corey, let me tell you something. That perspiration and fear happens at all levels.
It
So
does.
for those students that are out there that think it's only happening to them, or people who are just starting in their career, it happens at all levels, even at the
Hmm.
highest level. You
Yeah.
would be stunned to know what's happening to some of those people that are on camera all the time, or who are high profile executives that have
Mm.
these really big jobs. And it's tough for them to communicate because we don't spend a whole lot of time focusing on it. The fear, you asked about what is it about the fear? The fear is many times is worried about the unknown. You're worried about what might happen, or what if I'm a fraud? What if they
Mm.
realize I don't know what I'm talking about? Something like that, which goes back to the number one fundamental item that I have everyone focus on. And it's just, who are you? What's your story? If you just start with that, you
Mm.
really you automatically, even when I say that to you, if you just say, hey, Corey, who are you? What are you
Mm.
all about? It almost is like you get a chance to exhale because
Mm.
you're not pretending to be someone else or do something that someone else is asking you to do. And a lot of times people have this fear because they are trying to do something that's just not in their lane. Or they think, for example, when they give a presentation, they have to talk about everything or know about everything. And you really don't. You really just need to know about what you know about, which begins with you.
Mm, I love that. I feel like I just got like a free session from you, by the way. So please don't send me a bill because that was like really valuable info. And no, it's so true because I know from talking to young people, especially who have they struggle a lot with when it comes to communication.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have learned is there's that connection between your comfortability speaking, as you just mentioned, and your personal brand.
Mm-hmm.
Self-awareness, knowing who you are and knowing what you know. And that is exactly right.
Yeah.
That is the falter that many people face where they go up there and they try to become Einstein all of a sudden as they're
Right.
presenting. I'm like, well, you weren't Einstein yesterday,
Yeah.
so
Right.
don't
Right.
try
Totally.
and do that now. I think also I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I had a friend ask me once to help her prepare for a big presentation. And she said, I
Mm-hmm.
had seen you do some things and so I'm reaching out to you and maybe you can help me out. And so I sat her down. I said, well, what are your fears? And she began to express like trauma, like
Mm-hmm.
psychological trauma from
Right.
childhood of being told she wasn't smart
Yeah.
sometimes, or all
Yeah.
these things. So do you find in your line of work that sometimes there's other blockage that's really
Absolutely.
preventing them, such as
Yes.
mm,
Absolutely. I mean, so many people, everyone has something different that they're afraid of. And the things that people come out with that they are afraid of, um, you and I would never know,
mm,
right? If you told me what your fears were, I would never know that.
mhm,
It just, we are not thinking about that as we're watching someone else. We, when we're presenting, are the only ones who know what it is that's in our way. And that is the difference between being able to release that and then move forward and really excel and turn it up. Remember, at the beginning, I said that a lot of very high profile people, they're out there communicating, but in order for them to turn it up, and to be really good, the best that they can be, they need to be able to release some of those fears. And those fears, they're real because we think about them and we know that maybe somebody did say I couldn't spell one time or something like that. Now I'm
right,
afraid
yeah,
everyone's going to know I'm not, I'm a bad speller or something.
hmm
Um, but that's not what we're talking about. So if the fear is that, for example, your friend said, "Wow, people used to just tell me that I wasn't smart," or I had a client recently who said, um, I'm not a good reader, and so I'm afraid they're going to give me a script, and I'm going to flub it
mm,
up when they give me the script, and I'm not going to be able to read it." And I just sort of broke him down and said, "Go ahead and read me this. Read me this book that he had." And I said, "And read it really slow." And he read it word by word by word, and he didn't make any mistakes. And
mm,
I said, "Okay, now read it a little bit faster." And he started to read it a little bit faster. And then he didn't make any mistakes. And I said, "Okay." And he just looked at me and he said, "Okay, I you
mm,
just okay.
yeah,
I guess I can do it." And so it's kind of doing some of those exercises to say, you really can do more than you think you can. If you can
mhm,
put aside the fact that that was somebody else's opinion that said you weren't
yes,
smart. And by the way, who's judging what smart is?
hmm
Like what's the definition of that?
yeah.
And what definition are you using? You
Well, it's
know?
funny because I agree totally. It's always, I tell people all the time when they have those self-doubts, what I've learned and what I share with people is that 9 times out of 10, that doubtful voice that's on loop in your head, somebody else put that there.
Yeah.
You haven't even formed an opinion really about yourself because if everybody else's junk was in there already,
Yeah.
what do
Yeah.
you think you can do? Who do you think you are?
Right.
And that reminded me of when you talked about people not feeling good enough. The imposter syndrome
Yeah.
component is a
It's
big
real.
one with speaking.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
wonder how much people can overcome that. So I do know there are some techniques, but how do you prepare? I mean, that was one example you gave, but
Yeah.
what are some techniques for, getting someone to feel a bit more confident in their communication skills?
Yeah. Well, the first piece that people need to focus on is having that awareness and curiosity about themselves. Because before, let's say, for example, it's a job interview. I mean, we're talking about presentations, and you can use this for anything. It could be a presentation in class or at work
Hmm
or whatever it may be. But let's say it's for a job interview, because a lot of people come up with that with the job interview. Having to begin with, having that awareness about who you are and what your value is so important to just start off with that. if you can start off with that and say, wait a second, what's my story? How did I get here? And not be afraid to bring that in to that presentation, that interview, that job, whatever it may be, because that's what makes us different. That makes us unique. That makes us stand out. And it releases all those fears and things that may be in our way because no one knows you better than you. So that's what I say you start with. And when you can start with that, confidence starts to creep in when you don't even realize it. So, along with awareness and knowing who you are and what you bring to the table, is also knowing your audience. You need to know who it is that you're talking to, because if you're prepared for some kind of presentation or you're going into an interview and you have all this stuff that you want to say, but you don't really consider who your audience is, you're not really connecting. You're not
Mm.
really being a good communicator because you're not making that connection. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that that connection is a good, positive connection. So you really have
Mhm.
to think about who your audience is
Right.
and what
Right.
their interests are as well.
So when I talk about like people knowing what their personal brand is, and what I talk to
Hmm.
them about is bringing their own story into their personal brand, which is the
Yeah.
whole authentic conversation. Um, I think the idea of an audience, people have to realize that we're talking about it in a literal sense. But quite honestly, at the moment you leave your home and interact with someone during the daytime or whomever you run into, you are a brand and you're presenting your brand to the world. So what you just said actually really parlays into just everyday
Hmm.
experiences as well, it would seem. Or is that too abstract? What do you think about that?
No, no, I think you're spot on, Corey. I think that that's the idea is that communication, we are constantly communicating and
Mm,
we overlook that and think communication sounds a little stuffy. We need a better word for it. I don't know. I'm working on that, but we need a better word for communication. But it is communication, it is connection, and you are constantly making these connections. I also say it's not just with other people, it's connecting with so many different things just in how you roll through the world. That is a
yeah.
connection. How you just show up is a connection.
Mm,
So if we can all kind of reprogram how we think of communication and be thinking about it as how do we connect with each other? How am I connecting with the people in the grocery store, or whether it's with the people through email or when I show up in a room, even if I don't have to speak, am I making eye contact? When I'm on one of these Zoom calls, remember back during COVID, people would turn their cameras off because they were on for so long. Well,
hmm
that's saying something. You are
mm,
deciding how you're going to connect in that room by pulling yourself and your camera out of the
yeah.
room.
Yeah. And it's funny because even with me, like I would do my Zoom calls when my company went fully remote. They would turn on the camera and I would still wear my bow ties
Yeah.
because
Good
it's
for
sort of like
you.
it's my thing. And I sort of inadvertently branded myself as, and by the way, I tie them myself. Just want to make sure everyone,
Okay. All right.
they're
Good.
clip-ons,
That's another class. That's a class
Exactly.
in itself.
But it's my thing, so it became like I kind of accidentally branded myself that way. But it is how it's kind of how it's one of those unique identifiers, really. So people, I think, don't really understand that they have to sort of embrace their own story and
Yeah.
their own things so that they can then survive. I do wonder if you find common denominators, though, when it comes to we did talk a little earlier about the some of the obstacles people have when they're trying to overcome communication issues. But would you say there's some that are common you see across people? Like there's like one or two things that you see everyone has this one thing that's an obstacle?
That's a good question. Do we all share one thing that's an obstacle? Let me think about that. Hmm. Um, I will say this because we're all different, and really, when I approach people and work with different people, I look at them all differently because I want to find out who they really are, and that's what I'm aiming for.
Mm,
Um, So I guess I don't approach it like that to think that we all have some kind of common. Sometimes people will ask me, what are the top 10 things? And I can come up with them, but everyone's just a little bit different. So I don't
hmm
like to do that.
Yeah.
But I will say this, I think that the common denominator for many people is that we start in the wrong place. So, for example, if you have a presentation to give or you are presenting yourself, whatever it may be, whatever that presentation looks like, we tend to start with what we think people want from us as opposed to what we what is meaningful to us and what we want to give.
Mm. Wow.
And I will use an example of when someone has a presentation to give. Many times they will start with their slides, a slideshow.
Hmm.
That is the worst place to start. That is the biggest no-no I have. And people who work with me say, "Oh my God, I did my slides. You want me to throw them all away?" And I
Right.
said, let's just put them to the side for a minute.
Yeah.
And I say that because then you're locked into something that you think you have to say. You think that
Mm.
somebody else wants you to say. Many times it'll be a boss who will give you, you need to talk about X, Y, and Z. And so you think that that's what you need to talk about, and that's all that you need to talk about. And you put it on a slide, and now you form your whole presentation and you wrap it around this slide, as opposed to coming at it with, okay, what is it that I want to say? Who am I talking to?
Mm.
What is it that I bring to the table? And asking yourself all of those questions, coming up with what it is that you do want to talk about, and then approaching your slides.
Mm.
So slides is just one example, but you asked, what do we all have in common? And many of us have in common that we just start in the wrong place.
Yeah. Yeah. Slides and like index cards are like they chase me in my sleep.
Yeah,
Like it's there because that's that thing. And then you're like, well, do I read them or do I look up or do I pretend I'm not reading them, but they all can see me
right.
reading them? It's like then there's anxiety that
Yeah.
kicks in with that. So yeah, it's but I think there's a balance though of people, I guess, then are a little afraid of then how do you prepare? Right. So there's like preparation, we would think that it means that we need to kind of do all these things, have the notes, have the slides ready. But then if you abandon that particular ideology, then it's like, well, how does one prepare then to
Well,
go out?
they start with what we talked about before, is having the awareness and the curiosity about themselves
Mm,
and the information that they're bringing to the table, whatever it may be, and they start asking themselves some good questions before they ever get to any kind of slides. That's the last thing. If you even ever use a tool to present.
mm,
It's asking yourself all of those first questions, the awareness about myself, the awareness about everyone else in the room, and then the next piece would be, what's the content? Okay, what is it that I want to say? What's my material? What's my story? And
hmm.
then the third piece is, how do I want to execute that? So
Yeah.
whenever you have that opportunity where you are going to be speaking, you want to think of those three pieces: the awareness, the content, and the execution. Who am I? Who am I talking to? What's my story and the content that I need to present? And how do I choose to do it? Am I using slides? Am I standing at a podium? Am I using my hands? Am I going to wear a costume? What is it that's external that I'm going to be using to execute this performance?
Mm. And I love that you said performance too, because what I learned in the times I've had to speak, like you just mentioned the podium, I went up there, had the note cards, and I felt imprisoned.
Mm-hmm.
My body language felt like I was almost trying to like align myself with the squareness of the podium. And I
Yeah.
felt that's how I was delivering. And then all of a sudden I instinctively just was like, you know what? And I just took the microphone off and
Yeah.
and I walked and
Right.
paced back and forth. And it changed everything. That one moment of just kind of freeing myself. And then the conversation felt more free as well. So there's these pitfalls I think that we just fall into.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and it sounds to me like that's who you are.
mhm.
If you and I had talked about that before and we said, what will there be? Is there going to be a teleprompter? Is there going to be a podium there? Tools are you going to use? And you would have said, or I would have asked you, what do you like to use? And you probably would have said, I like to walk around. I
Right.
want to be free. You
Yeah.
would have said that right off the bat. And we
Hmm.
would say, okay, let's lose the podium.
Yeah.
Let you get up there and you do your thing, because that's who you are.
Hmm. Yeah, that's my, and I will say also, there are some things, I don't know how people might feel about this. I have taken some people and they've tried it and it works. I recommend, it's a little tricky, but to get over your fear sometimes, try an open mic night in comedy.
Ooh, look at you.
It can go
Wow.
either way, but that's sort of where I come from. That's sort of how I got to that point.
Wow.
You know what I mean? But some people they've done it and they're like, wow, that really worked. Some people they're in therapy now because
Yeah, I don't know that that's where I'm going, but I
yeah.
will go and watch you and
Yeah.
support you, Corey.
Well, thank you. Yeah, but I mean it does have some sort of cathartic I mean, it's tricky because people can judge you, and of course they're gonna, maybe not laugh, which could affect you. But I just think any chance you can practice, I would say,
Yeah.
to somehow even your family or maybe friends, ask them how things sound, and hopefully they'll be honest with you. I think that's also um, a tool maybe that can be used. Now, when we talk about leadership specifically,
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, communicating to a brand, to a team, let's say, because you want to motivate them to work for you or
Mm-hmm.
work on a project. It still takes some persuasion, but I guess it's a little different than delivering a presentation. So do you draw a distinction between in a corporate structure, leaders who need to learn to communicate better? Do you have a different way you approach that versus how you would approach that performer who needs to do something more in an entertainment aspect?
Well, I'm gonna point out something to you here and to whoever's listening, but when you're communicating, you are persuading.
Hmm.
So when you are speaking to a group of people, um, you are trying to convince them of something that you believe in or that you are presenting. So whether you are an individual who is a lower ranking person in the organization or you are a leader, when you have the opportunity to communicate and make connections, part of what you're doing is persuasion.
Hmm.
Now, if you're a leader, you have more people to persuade and you have more people that you're trying to get to buy into what it is that you're saying. So, as far as leadership goes, it's just you need to know yourself better, maybe than you would have when you were a lower level employee.
Hmm.
But they have to do the same thing that all of us are trying to do. I go back to connection. We're all trying to make those connections. So if you are a leader in an organization, you are trying to get people to buy in to your beliefs. You're trying to get people to buy into your way of working, to whatever it
Hmm.
is that you're trying to establish. And the more you can be honest with who you are, they will see that. It's part of the buy-in. If they think that you are manipulating them in some way, that is not authentic because you are manipulating them in some way. Let's be honest. It's a persuasion, it's manipulation. You're trying to make that connection and say, hey, I want you to believe what I am telling you so that you work
Hmm.
harder. But not that that's always a bad thing, because I think you think of words like manipulation, persuasion as being bad. It's not
Right.
necessarily bad.
Right.
Um,
They sound negative
they
or
sound negative, right?
yeah.
But some people are better at it than others because they really know who they are and what they want you to do, and they're able to tell you the why. When you're speaking to a group of people, you also want to express what's in it for them.
Hmm.
Why are they believing in this?
Hmm.
And we all want to feel like we're heard. So when we're speaking to a group of people, they want to feel like they are heard, that they are being represented. So as a leader, you have just much more to consider.
Hmm. I love that. And that's such a timely conversation too, because, or I would say a timely contribution to the conversation because of what's going on now with all the efforts seemingly to roll back DE&I,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be in academia or in corporate structures. And, it's so strange to me because the whole reason why those things were implemented was
Mm-hmm.
because people were not represented. To
Yeah.
begin with, it was
Yeah.
like a remedy, and now people are trying to take that back. So, I think it's really important to your point. Like you can include people, but are they participating? Are they
Yeah.
given a
Yeah.
voice, right? An
Right.
opportunity to participate and contribute.
Right.
Now, I do want to talk about 10 seconds to air.
Oh, sure. Let's do it.
Yes, your podcast. Now, many people who are going to just tune in, of course, we will rehash later that we had some technical difficulties today on this
Yes. Yes. It
podcast.
happens.
It happens, but it's so great. So I'm really happy that, there's tenacity. We can keep going. So you
Yeah.
know the podcast world yourself. So 10 Seconds to Air is the podcast that you actually host. So tell me a little
Yes.
bit about it and some of your the platforms that you discuss on the show.
Yeah, so it's really fun. I continue this conversation about communication. That's where the podcast was born. And
Mhm.
the name 10 Seconds to Air was born out of my time on television as a news anchor and reporter, and having to go through those 10 seconds to air. And I
Mhm.
realized that all of us have these these moments before we have to perform or
Yeah.
do something big. We have 10 seconds to whatever it is that you may do. We all share that, and we all share what goes through our mind moments before that big moment. So
Mm.
that's where the name came from. But what the podcast is I talk to world-class communicators from a variety of fields. And I talk to them about what goes through their mind moments before their big moment. So I have, who do I have coming up? I have Tony Hale, the actor, super
Mhm.
fun. He's got the movie Inside Out coming up, and he plays one of the characters in there. So hearing about what goes through his mind before he takes on some of these roles, really cool guy, really cool podcast. I have Dr. Haver. She talks about menopause. I have Dr. Brewer. He just wrote a book called, oh, I can't think of the name of the book, but it's Hunger versus Habit.
Mm.
And it talks about, are you eating out of hunger or are you eating out of habit? Actually, I
Oh,
think
I
that's the
need
name
that
of the
book.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. So I talked to world-class communicators from a variety of fields to get people to hear what goes through their mind before these big moments, because we all share them. And hopefully the conversations are inspirational and get you thinking about how you
Mm.
can do it better, how we can all communicate better, how we can all connect.
Wonderful, optimistic final words today in this conversation from Alita Guillen. And I definitely just appreciate once again your patience, but also the conversation. It's really wonderful. And as I mentioned, I'm very passionate about communication and I love the work you're doing. And I can't wait to share it with our audience. So thanks for being here today on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you, Corey.